My videos are long. It's a lot of information. Enjoy. There is a lot of problems in America. Many problems in America. The Jewish community is interesting. It has many different groups. So you have they're basically decided by how religious they are, how committed they are, and how traditional they are. So like we know, most Jewish people are secular. Then there's religious Jews, between 10 and 20% of Jews are more traditional, more religious. You'd call them Orthodox. And about maybe 5 or 6%, I believe, are Hasidic Jews. Now, there's a very interesting small subset of Jews that get into the news quite often, not because of their numbers, but because of their interesting, fascinating story. And those are the Jews that leave the Orthodox community. Ex-religious community, ex-religious Jews. In Yiddish, they have different ways. They're called Ogefarne or Fry or whatever it is. And in English, they're called, some people term them as OTD, off the derech. Derech being the way of traditional Judaism, and then off the derech is OTD. It's an interesting group of people. There's a lot of books about it and articles. The big struggle about some people to go OTD is not so much how am I going to find a job. I mean, obviously it's a struggle to survive and to thrive. That's not the big struggle that happens. It's more of a spiritual, psychological struggle. Because you could figure out how to live in America. You can go on YouTube and figure it out. You could ask people. It's technical stuff is not the challenge. It is a challenge, but it's not the challenge. The challenge is basically you're going in from a very strongly communitarian society to a liberal individual society. And that switchover takes years, lifetime, or it could never really actually happen. Communitarianism is obviously you give up your rights for the rights of the community. That's what communitarianism is. And as not a reward, but in return, what the community does is provides you with a sense of community, a sense of belonging, and depending on which community you have, they will take care of you in a time of need. So you'll say the Satmar community has a tremendous infrastructure of tzedakah, of charity, that they help each other out. And they have, I guess, maybe 20%, maybe by then even 30% of people that are wealthy, maybe top 5% are really very extremely wealthy, and they compete with each other towards who can give more charity and who can be higher on the list of the charity givers. They have a tremendous, Hasidim have, not Lubavitch, but Hasidim have a tremendous charity infrastructure, Borough Park, Williamsburg, and upstate New York, and wherever they are around the world. Other communities, the less religious they get, or the more, say, modern they get, or the less Hasidish they get, the less charity. They have charity, but they have it a lot less. Crown Heights is a community that lags behind when it comes to charity. They also lag behind many other things. I explained that in a different video because of where they come from, because of their background, etc. But that's what communitarianism is. Communitarianism doesn't just exist in the Hasidic community or in the Orthodox community. Communitarian exists in Muslim communities or in Christian communities all over the world. When you leave such a community and you go into American society, so all of a sudden it's every person for themselves, because liberal individualism says every person for themselves, and the idea is if I do well with my business, and if I do well with my personal life, my business, therefore if I'm an entrepreneur, and I do the best I can, and even if I go into this greedy capitalistic thing, but if I do the best for myself, then the next door neighbor will do the best for themselves, and then together you will have the best society ever, and you actually did have. America, with its capitalism, with all of its faults, did create something that has never been created before. And the idea from the Founding Fathers was liberal individualism. Now, how does that pertain to ex-religious people? They have to go from a place that, let's say, you prayed 3 times a day, or you have a very big active family life. So you have people that are really engaged in your life, and people don't want to be part of that anymore. They move out. And they move, let's say, from Crown Heights to Prospect Heights, or from South Williamsburg to North Williamsburg. Just give me a small example, but the move is a couple of blocks, but it's a universe away. Because in North Williamsburg, no one's going to check up on you to make sure you're okay, and also, no one's going to know who your father is and who your uncle is, and also, you're not going to have that warmth when you come into a place. But in South Williamsburg, they'll know who your father and your mother is, but they'll also mix into your life. In North Williamsburg, you could do whatever you want. You could pass away right in front of them. Won't matter because they're liberal individualism. Those people actually couldn't call themselves. What do those people call themselves? Libertarians. Libertarians. Yeah, libertarians. Yet you never met a warm libertarian. always people like, okay, he died in front of me, but Ron Paul said I should not treat him. So, anyway, I'm being funny. I know that's not what it's about for the 17 people watching this video. 1700, Solzheim. Anyway, that's the struggle of leaving. Now, the reality with that community is it's spread around. The amount of ex-religious people used to be very, very few religious people that left. As time went on, because of their size and because of the internet and because of people are just said and people got more empowered to do what they had to do, they said, okay, we're not having this anymore. So you have a whole huge sort of subculture of ex-religious people throughout the world. Wherever there's an Orthodox community, you have on the fringes, sort of say, an ex-Orthodox community. So in Muncie, you'll have the very religious people, but in the outer towns, you'll have a lot of ex-religious people that live there all around. Either they're directly connected with their job or their lifestyle with the religious community, or they're on their own, but they want to live adjacent because maybe that's where their family lives, that's where they're used to growing up, or more importantly, they do not, usually most of the time, ex-religious people do not move out totally on their own. You'll have that once in a blue moon, you'll have someone that moved to South Carolina and they live there with their maybe non-Jewish spouse or girlfriend or boyfriend, and they're there for like the next 10, 20 years. It's not very often that happens. Usually what happens is they leave in groups and people group together, either based on the community that they came from or based on interests. So in New York, you'll have, in Crown Heights, you'll have a vast variety of different types of communities that are no longer as religious as how they grew up. So some of them will be into partying. Some of them, typically I guess younger people, will be into a lot of partying, maybe a lot of drugs. Some of them will be into medicine work with the plant-based medicine stuff. Some of them will be into becoming professionals and maybe moving to the city. And then you never hear from them again. You all have all these different sub-communities that are around, that are adjacent to the communities that they grew up in, and they create their own new community. You have a few organizations that help out. There's one organization that's correctly sort of targeted a lot. The organization is called Footsteps. I personally, I would say I'm embarrassed, but I was involved in that organization. I was really taken by the idea that, and now when I moved out of Crown Heights, in 2009. Then I moved back for a few years. Then I moved to Bushwick. Then I partied a lot. When I moved out of Crown Heights, it was after the economy crashed. So not only did you have, and it wasn't so popular yet, and the religious community wasn't as accepting as people who left their community. There was still big sort of opposition to it, and they didn't know what to do with it. Before I tell you my story, I have to explain that there's something that ex-religious people don't understand. Is ex-religious people in general don't understand that the reason why people don't want you to leave is not so much because they want you to put on tefillin or daven or keep Shabbos. Sometimes it's very, very simple. They miss you. That's it. They used to be in yeshiva, used to be in Shul, used to be here, used to be there, used to hang out at 7-Eleven, used to be at all these different places. Now you're not there anymore because you're not religious anymore. Well, so you look different, but basically they miss you, and that's a thing that they just don't realize. That, and not blaming anyone here, I'm just explaining a side note in case anyone that's ex-from is not to make you feel bad, is watching this, because I realize there's just a basic humanity to this. Chaim used to be around, now he's not, we miss him. So we're going to tell him, what are we going to say? We miss you? Say, no, you have to keep Shabbos, whatever. I don't think those conversations go on that much anymore. There's a whole acceptance towards, because so many people left. My story, I left in the beginning when the economy was doing really badly, and there was very little money around, and there were literally people that were basically homeless, living in abandoned warehouses, abandoned churches, Williamsburg, empty lots with tents. There was a feeling of, okay, I want to restart my life, but there was also a feeling of desperation that went on. I really got involved because my grandfather saved Jewish people during World War II. His name is Chaim Harwitz. They call him Chaim Tashkent because he had a house in the south, in Tashkent. And he had a house, and he opened his house for a lot of students from the yeshiva that were running from the north to the south, and he gave them food, and he literally saved the lives of a lot of people. He also was a forger, and he forged a lot of stamps to get more food, and he got them, even though he was in the risk of jail, death, or whatever it is. Every story you hear about Russia, almost killed. No one almost got a parking ticket. In America, you almost got a parking ticket. In Russia, you're almost dead, or Siberia. It has to be very dramatic. Otherwise, anyway, grandfather saved those people. So I figured in my life, if I'm going to leave my community, I should also I should also um, be there to help other people, my brethren who are leaving their communities and they're going through such difficult times. You're difficult, very, very difficult times. And a lot of people today that have left recently or in process of leaving or figuring out their place in the world have tremendous, tremendous difficult times. Me personally, at some point, I turned my back on these people because I couldn't anymore. It was just, it's a mixture. It's an interesting mixture of people coming with entitlement because when you're in the community, you're entitled, especially the women are treated, they're treated sort of, I wouldn't say second class citizens because it depends on which community, which neighborhood. Crown Heights, women weren't second class citizens. Women actually had a much easier time than the men do, and they're also very empowered with the Chabad message. But in Williamsburg and Borough Park, frankly, women were not treated well, and I don't even know if they're treated well now. But they are treated, but they're treasured. They're not mistreated as slaves. They're put into a place of they're relegated to the place of okay, have babies, maybe have a business, but for your family, but they were also treated well. They weren't hit like the boys, and they didn't go to yeshiva for 500 hours. Boys were terribly mistreated, probably till now in yeshiva, unfortunately. It changed officially a little bit. I don't know how much it actually changed. So you had very entitled, with the women you had very entitled, with the boys you had a lot of desperation and a lot of people that were lost, but you also had, basically the ingredients that was missing is the Jewish ingredient of rebuilding. They kind of had it, but they kind of did. America is split into a couple of different things. So 1945, after World War II, till 1965, is capitalism. Everything was about buying a new washing machine, dryer, this, that, a new car. It was very easy to make money. America was on the top of the world. They created trading partners all over the place. They used to line up in college begging people for work jobs. Basically, the economy was growing like crazy in the 50s. 65 was a rebellion against that. So America became more sociology. Was the sort of the soul behind America. If everything was sociology, they rebelled against a capitalistic system, and they said, "What's the reason?" And what's not the reason? Yeah, what's the reason we're doing things? What's the soul behind it? And they started growing here, and then they became the hippie movement. There's a counterculture. There was a feminist movement then. There was the anti-war movement then. There was the civil rights movement then. That was in the 60s. That was the soul of America. And there was sociology, and there was the study of like why you became a criminal because you grew up poor, why you became a criminal. That was like the conversation of sociology, the more sociology. Unfortunately, you had master-slave dialectics, so you had levels of power that came along with sociology, and that's affecting society today. Everything's looked at if you're, I'll explain to you in a second why, but then who's in power and who's not in power, that's along with sociology as well. In 65 to 1985. 1985, there's a very famous case of. 1985, there's a very famous case of. The very famous case in 1985 of a child molestation case in daycare centers all over America, and it went all over the world, and went this crazy conspiracy theory that the government is involved, like the crazy conspiracy theories you have of today, but this was of those days in mid-1980s, and it turns out it was a fake story. It wasn't true. Kids were making up a story. Then they were just being propped to say things by a therapist. But psychology became the soul of America, the background, psychology. So you'll hear stuff like, because your father did this and you did that, and then therapy became more popular as time went on, psychology. That went on for about 20 years, 2005, 1985, 2005, 2008, Obama coming to office, and you had the introduction of identity politics. Identity became the soul of the country. And now you have identity. But with identity, something has its identity. With identity, it has its origin in sociology, because you have a lot of the sort of the Marxist way of looking at who's in charge. Everything is a power-based structure, master-slave dialectic. And then I'm always afraid of saying something that's not exactly correct, but then this whole video you may not agree with, so enjoy. With that society of identity-based society, you had a race to who could be the biggest victim, because if you are just, they made the idea of a white guy being bad. Now, I don't know who came up with this. There's different conspiracy theories who orchestrated this in society, but they did a really good job at destroying society. They took racism, they made it the opposite way. They took it bad to be a man, it's bad to be white, it's bad to be successful, it's bad to be everything. It's the disaster hasn't even unfolded. It's just the beginning of the disaster. Destroyed relationships. I mean, that's already, feminism destroyed relationships. Not feminism from the 60s or 70s, feminism from the last 20, 30 years, certainly the last 10 years, 15 years. It just destroyed relationships. It shamed men for doing anything wrong, but just for existing. And you're never going to have a good outcome if you're shaming men for existing. And it's just toxicity, false accusations. It's a real mess. We haven't seen the disaster yet. It's coming up. Right now, I would say American society is like a very poor man who has $1,000 staying in a luxury hotel, and you're watching him in a luxury hotel, but the next day he's homeless. That's my take on American society is right now. With all these things, it's just the foundation of society is being taken away. And 50%, more than 50% of people under the age of 30 are not looking for relationships. It's like people don't even realize it's a disaster. It's just it's not going. A society may not last because in order to have a society, in order to have a creative economy, to a continuing economy, you need more children than you already have. And they didn't attack the security of America. They didn't attack the economy of America. What was attacked here, assuming that's on the outside, but if it's on the inside, what's being attacked here is the idea of relationship, the idea of family. Like it's bad to have a family, it's stupid to have kids. You can't have continuous society and continuing economy in the future. Maybe things will change later with technology. I don't know. Japan's having a big problem with an inverse, but it's basically none of these things come from good places. But anyway, with American society turning towards identity politics, you had a race to the top who could be the biggest victim, and the ex-religious community became, well, a lot more people left the community in around that time, and they wanted to hold on for as long as they can to this identity of saying, I left my religious community. I did not get a good English education until in my 20s. I had to get my GED and go to college. I was held back. I was told this and that. I was abused, etc., etc. And they hold on to it as a badge for a really long time. Now, you're also dealing with Jews who are OCD. You're also dealing with Jews who never really fit into the box to begin with. So you have this constant issue exacerbated. Now, the organization Footsteps itself, I wouldn't call them well-meaning. I would say that they're using the template they're supposedly using is stuff from their past, from their parents and grandparents, at least in some of the leadership that they fought for civil rights for African Americans in the 60s. So correctly, they did that very correctly, but they're using the same template now as in the past. And the whole thing's a mess because it turns out it's not really about empowering people, it's about hating on people. It turns out if you're a man in that organization, you don't want to be there. All the men left, all the straight men left. Yeah, so it's basically a lot of hatred towards men. Obviously, hatred towards religious community that exacerbates itself, that's cooking there. It's a very, very extremely unhealthy organization, and the general ex-religious community is pretty unhealthy overall. The leaders are not decent people. They took the sort of the worst parts of the way they grew up, the Hasidic with the warmth and the food and the togetherness and helping each other out. They took that, got rid of that. They kept the laws, but they didn't do the laws towards Judaism. They did the laws towards being a leftist, towards being liberal, towards being woke, towards being progressive. And then the place it's not a blessed community, put it that way. They also got caught up in the idea that they could be in the press, they could be in the news. I myself was in the New York Times once. The guys are very excited about that. I think in terms of the organization Footsteps itself, some of the leadership has great resentment, which is part of sort of what goes on right now in the community of people physically changing their bodies. Now, physically changing your body is something that's being fought about a lot, and it's something that people are very passionate about. Relax. It's not even true. The very, very passionate is the whole thing. It lacks smell. It doesn't smell authentic at all. Most of the social justice stuff today is not authentic, period. It's just a way of getting someone to get power. So they do it through social justice. They don't give a crap about any of these people. When it comes down to it, not actually fighting for anyone's rights. They're fighting for the right to be nasty or to have control. Whole operating on your body and mutilating your body. And sometimes people come out and look a lot better than they did coming in, to be honest. Let's be honest about it, or at least for me. So, but this idea comes from resentment. It comes from self-hatred. And in that organization specifically, there's resentment towards people who are good-looking people, right? I was going to say like me, but if some of the 14 people watching this in the comments, I don't know what they're going to say. Anyway, we're good-looking people. So if you're good-looking, well, we're resentful towards you. So now we're going to surrender ourselves with this idea of mutilating your body. We're going to call it trans rights. We're going to call it this right or that right, because we don't like the fact that, we don't like good-looking people. And that's the foundation of a big part of these movements throughout the world. The ex-religious community has this, has a lot of this. Obviously, a lot of people that leave also are people that their orientation doesn't fit into the Orthodox community. Totally makes sense. Totally makes sense to leave if that's the case. There's no complaints there. But the question a lot of times you have to ask yourself is what you're doing. Okay, so there's this philosopher Immanuel Kant, and Immanuel Kant said, he argued with there's two philosophies out there. One's utilitarianism, to do the greatest amount of good, the greatest amount of people. Just do good. It just makes sure the best outcome. And then there's Immanuel Kant, and he said, in order to do something good, you have to really actually do it for selfless reasons, for good reasons. And if you're not doing it for the correct reason, you shouldn't do it at all. Obviously, so you're going to have someone in charity, giving charity in some place, and then they're doing it because they want their name to be out there. It's for their ego. Should they still give charity? Well, according to utilitarian outlook, 100%. According to Immanuel Kant, you shouldn't. When it comes to social justice and when it comes to fighting for people's rights, you have to be a Kantist. You have to be very, 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 very careful of why you're doing it. Otherwise, you get into big trouble. And Footsteps as an organization there's toxicity from the top that goes down to the bottom. There's constant victimhood. There's using those people's terrible life predicaments to raise funds for their own egos. It's not a great place. With that, obviously, actually, there's hatred, again, like I said, towards men. There's hatred towards, I don't know, it's just a toxic, nasty place. It's very sad. It doesn't have the Jewish story to it. Organization, and a lot of people in that community, the ex-religious community, don't have the Jewish story of really rebuilding. They sort of have it, but they very much want to stay in there because that's what society gives you points for. Why do you think people do things? People do things because what are they incentivized to do? So they get their biggest reward, not so much for saying, hey, this is what I accomplished. They're rewarded for it, but they're majorly, massively rewarded for staying in the victim mentality. And you have these older Jewish people who their grandparents hated the Orthodox, so they're very excited to save the Orthodox kids. And they're a bunch of idiots. They come around to volunteer. They're morons, basically, because they're like, oh, wow. Like, you don't get it. I know you're trying to help. You don't get it. You're trying to live, you're trying to live out your own fantasy of you weren't able to stand up to your father, so you want these ex-religious kids to stand up to their fathers or something like that, some fantasy of their life. But then they'll reward them, say, wow, you left the community. Wow, you're so brave. You came from them. That's great. It's a great story. It's a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun with it for a long time until I rediscovered Judaism. But that's a personal journey of me, and I could say enough personal stuff in one video. It's not about me. Anyway, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I probably missed out stuff. We can make another video. Okay, drop a comment and a like. Why the hell did they say that by the end? Really? It's going to help me if I have more subscribers? If I have 500 subscribers, now I have 550. Really? It's really going to help me. Now I have 550 subscribers.